Hello, everyone. Thank you all so much for joining us. This is Left Bank Books presents soon-to-be St. Louis author Meredith Tate, who will discuss her new YA novel, Ship. Right here. Tate will be in conversation with YA author Rosaria Munda. And Z Brewer unfortunately could not make it to tonight's event. Left Bank Books is St. Louis's oldest independent bookstore. We would like to thank all of our supporters, the supporters of Meredith and Rosaria, and everyone for their outpouring of love for our bookstore. Left Bank Books offers curbside pickup and delivery to anywhere in the country, anywhere in the world. We are very happy that we have our doors open, and you can find a signed copy that Meredith came in to sign on our shelves. We believe that events are a way to expand your mind and bring in new thoughts to make the world a better place. So we hope that you enjoy this event, and we hope that you support Left Bank Books by purchasing one of these beautiful signed copies. Show you the signature. Yay. Purchasing a signed copy of the book from Left Bank Books allows us to keep our bookstore and staff operating. So thank you for your support. I am Shane Mullen. I'm the events coordinator for Left Bank Books. I help produce our hundreds of author events each year with a fantastic team here in St. Louis. We will be taking questions from you, the audience, at the end of the event. So please type your questions as a comment. And be sure to follow Left Bank Books on Facebook and YouTube to be notified about all of our fantastic virtual events. Our June calendar is packed with fantastic events for readers of all ages. And now about tonight's book, Shipped. Can two IRL enemies find their happily ever after online? Stella Green and Wesley Clark are Gene Connolly Memorial High School's biggest rivals. While the two have been battling it out for top student, it's a race to the bottom when it comes to snide comments and pulling the dirtiest prank. For years, Stella and Wes have been the villain in each other's story, and now it's all out war. And there is no bigger battle than the one for valedictorian, and more specifically, the coveted valedictorian scholarship. But Stella and Wes have more in common than they think. Both are huge fans of Warship 7, a popular sci-fi TV drama with a dedicated online following. And the two start chatting under aliases without a clue that their rival is just beyond the screen. They realize that they're both attending SciCon this year, so they plan to dress in their best cosplay and finally meet IRL. While tensions at school are rising and SciCon inches closer and closer, the enemy lines between Stella and Wes blur when a class project shows them they might understand one another better than anyone else, and not just in cosplay. From the author of The Last Confession of Autumn Casterly comes a heartfelt story about rivalry, friendships, and defying preconceived notions, even the ones about yourself. Kirka says it is a delicious and nerdy romance. And now about tonight's speakers. Meredith Tate grew up in Concord, New Hampshire, where she fell in love with her two passions, writing and traveling. She earned her master's degree in social work from the University of New Hampshire and worked in Boston for several years before deciding to pursue her true dream of telling stories. After spending 3 wonderful years in St. Louis, Missouri, and 3 more amazing years in Zurich, Switzerland, Meredith now lives in Houston with her husband and her spoiled dog, and soon will be living in St. Louis with her husband and her spoiled dog. When Meredith's not writing, she loves photography, playing the piano, trying new recipes, and chasing her goal of seeing every continent. 4 down, 3 to go. And tonight, Meredith will be in conversation with Rosaria Munda. Rosaria grew up in rural North Carolina, where she climbed trees, read Harry Potter fan fiction, and taught herself Latin. She studied political theory at Princeton and lives with her husband in Chicago. Her debut young adult fantasy, Fireborn, was published in 2019, and the second book is out now and also on our shelves. I will be sharing a link to both of these books and also the new one in the Fireborn series. And now, without further ado, I would love to welcome our fantastic guests for the evening, Meredith Tate and Rosaria Munda for Left Bank Books. Hello.
Hi.
Hi.
Thank you so much for that introduction, Shane.
Yeah, it's really such a pleasure having both of you here tonight. I'm really excited, Meredith, that you're going to be one of our St. Louis authors, and really excited to like do more events with you in person once that happens. So
I know, I'm so excited.
Yeah.
Be nice to be back.
Yeah. All right. Well, I will let you two have this conversation. I will sit in the background and have fun.
All right, thank you. Well, hey Meredith, how you doing?
Hey, good. It's good to talk to you finally face to face.
I know. Yeah, we were just talking about how this is kind of like our IRL meeting because we've known each other for a while online, and now we're seeing each other's faces, although it's still online. So yeah, it's a pleasure to be here tonight with Left Bank Books. I'm not from St. Louis, but I did an event with them way back in the days when Fireborn was coming out, and so it's nice to sort of be back. And I'm really excited to be here talking with Meredith about Shift because I guess a little background about how we know each other. Meredith and I are with the same imprint and with the same editor, and so I've actually heard about this book like from its earliest stages. And you might have heard that in my bio it's mentioned that I like to read Harry Potter fan fiction. So I have this like abiding love of fan culture. And when I heard the pitch of a book about two fans meeting online, and all the joy that would entail, I was really, really excited. So I'm excited to be here and talk about that.
I'm so excited.
Thank you. Thanks for inviting me to join you. So I mean, I guess I just wanted to kick off by asking you. I mean, we heard the book jacket summary of the book, which I thought Shane read very well. There's a lot of attitude. I loved it. Would you like to add anything about like what the book is about before we jump in?
Sure. So I pitched Shipped as you've got mail, it goes to ComicCon. So that's kind of what I went off with. And again, it's about it's an enemies to lovers romance between Stella and Wesley, who absolutely hate each other, and they are rivals for valedictorian, and they're seniors. And basically, as the year is winding down, one of them is going to get valedictorian, and one of them is not. Mm-hmm. And things are heating up. They get embroiled in a prank war. They're willing to sabotage each other. But then they're both actually secret fans of this canceled sci-fi show, which I always describe as my favorite ship from Game of Thrones thrown into Firefly, which is one of my favorite shows. Mm-hmm. And so they're both fans of this same canceled sci-fi show, Warship 7, canceled after one season, and they meet anonymously online in a forum for this show while they're preparing to go and cosplay to their favorite con. And so as tension heats up in real life, sparks start to fly online. So I had a lot of fun with it.
Yeah, that sounds like that's just a wonderful description of it. What can I ask? Because I just wanted to kind of delve into what are these fandoms exactly? So like what ship are you thinking of with Game of Thrones? Are you willing to say?
I love Bran and Jaime, and I have not forgiven D&D for what they've done to us, and I never will.
Yeah, that was pretty brutal. I don't really know what was. It's like hard to even imagine what was the thought process with that one, but it's okay because now we can write the fan fiction of the
exactly
as they do.
Exactly, and Firefly is always going to be dear to me, and I'm still always bummed that it never got more than one season. So I kind of wanted to put that in the book too.
Yeah, absolutely. It is kind of one of those legendary like touchstones of I think fan culture, cult culture, cult classics. I kind of agree with. Have you seen the I think it's Honest Trailer's video about Firefly, where he's like, you should actually be glad this show is canceled because by the second season it would have petered out and no one would have liked it, which is probably true. There's but in its incomplete form, it had the potential to be perfect.
Yeah. So then it's like, what would you rather have? Would you rather have a show that goes on forever, but then slowly starts to die, like Game of Thrones, or a show that only has one season and it gets cut short? I don't know. They're both bad. So
yeah, honestly, I'd rather, given how painful the D&D ending was, I think I'd rather have a Firefly situation. And I feel like Serenity was a satisfying movie, so I felt like at the end I had my, I could process it, but
because I'm at least we can kind of mentally think through how it would end as opposed to being fed this terrible ending that makes no sense.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, because I always feel like Game of Thrones, it was like someone had given them the notes and then the notes were what you saw on the screen. And it's just that wasn't enough for me. I don't know. So I guess another thing I was really delighted to see when I was looking through Shipped was I don't think I've ever seen the words hurt/comfort like in a published book before. I started laughing pretty hard at that. So I was wondering, like, what are, talk to me about like what I suspect you've read some fan fiction in your life. So like, are you willing to share what sorts of tags you like, what fandoms you like to read in?
Yeah. So I love fanfic. I am a huge lurker on AO3. I've never actually written any, but I am a serious reader of fanfic. I love fanfic. Definitely hurt comfort. Only one bed. Basically, anytime there's an enemies to lover situation, I will be there. Fix it fic when it's necessary, which, as we've talked about, it is a lot of the time. What about you? What are your favorites?
I like hurt comfort too. I'm trying to think what are the, like, how I would break it down. I feel like I read more fan fiction like in the fanfiction.net heyday, and then recently I've been more on AO3.
Yeah.
But I was like, I kind of was like one of those people who waffled between like Drary and Hermione just like pretty obsessively when I was younger, which is like really embarrassing to like do that. But these days I've been like really enjoying like MCU like sitcom like fanfics where it's like, because whenever I watch like a Marvel movie, I just want them to be in Stark Tower. Like whenever they get to the action part, I'm like, I'm done here. I'm just here for the quips. Like I want like Act 1 and Act 2. I don't want Act 3.
Like also
I feel like,
and stuff between the characters.
Yeah. So I love like the fics that just put them in Stark Tower and sit around like, making jokes about how Steve Rogers doesn't know like what TV is, things like that. Just delightful. Yeah. So are there any like fun like Easter eggs that are very like that you think a fan would pick up on in Shipped that are specific to any particular thing?
There's definitely a few in there that are kind of probably inspired by my times in fandom and everything. Not sure if I can think of anything specifically, but a lot of the Warship 7 stuff is kind of like, I had so much fun writing it. I was just picturing like my favorite shows, my favorite characters, and I was just like, I'm gonna throw it all in there.
Yeah.
One Easter egg is that the scene when they're in SciCon and Wesley is looking around and they in the book, there's a masquerade, and basically it's part of a cosplay contest. So they have to do all these different things while staying in character. And the last part of the masquerade is a slow dance song, which obviously, oh no, Wesley and Stella ended up dancing together. But Wesley looks around and notices a bunch of the cosplayers coupling up, and it's a bunch of my favorite ships that, oh no, how did they end up together on the page?
That's awesome. That's really, that would be so delightful. Have you ever, I'm assuming you've gone to cons before, have you ever cosplayed at cons before?
I've put together some stuff, not necessarily for cons. Let's see, I went as Dr. Holtzman from Ghostbuster. I've got a Holtzman costume. I went as Zoe from Firefly. I really want to put together a Rey cosplay, and I really want to put together a Captain Marvel cosplay.
Yeah.
As soon as events come back, I'll be there.
The Rey one, yeah, I feel that very much like in my bones. Like I'm like, like 6-year-old me just like wants to like dress up like Rey. Which is so satisfying. I spent a lot of my childhood being like, I guess Qui-Gon Jinn has long brown hair like me. That's close enough, right? Yeah, that's really wonderful. Okay, shifting away a little bit from fan culture.
Okay.
One of the things, this is a conversation that I had about your books actually with our editor. And one of the things one of the things that we both just love about your books, and I've read also this book that came out before Shipped called The Last Confessions of Autumn Casterly. Last Confession of Autumn Casterly. And one thing that like I see sort of repeated in your writing is you have these characters who are very down to earth, like often like working class families, and they don't really come from that kind of like shiny Disney nuclear family, like with the 2 parents and the 2 kids. Like there's often divorce, there's step parents, there are in Shipped, Stella's sister is like a teenage mom, or like and so all of these sort of real world, these are like families that I recognize that I grew up with in a way that I wish it's like almost reading your books made me realize how rarely I see that in contemporary YA. Like it's often like wealthy, sort of shiny families. And like the characters themselves are not, they're not, super hot. Like they often have, some, like sometimes they're overweight, or they think about themselves as not that attractive. Like they're just these very sort of personal, down to earth characters. And so I wanted to hear like you talk about that. Like, is that something you go into consciously wanting to do, or is it like, is it something that sort of just happens? I'm just curious.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely, I guess when I'm writing a character, I kind of try to, I do a lot of kind of questionnaires, like I interview my characters, and I'm kind of thinking through like, what was their past like, what was their history like, what's going on at home. And I do feel like a lot of times it took me a while to kind of see myself represented in media, and I think that it's important to kind of try to reflect kind of what teens are doing every day and everything. And so I just try to, I try to make them flawed, and I don't, I'm not trying to make perfect characters. Like I know I've seen some reviews sometimes that are like, oh, this character was kind of rude and unlikable. I'm like, yeah, but a lot of teens like do rude things. I did rude things. I probably do rude things now. Like,
Right.
I'm not going to write characters that are perfect, that always do things that you agree with, that you're always like, oh wow, what a good choice. It's like, because that wasn't me as a teenager. As a teenager, I made a lot of bad choices, and I probably was rude. I said a lot of things that, looking back, I'd probably be kind of cringing at. But I guess I try to. I write books for teen me, so it's
right. It's more to be able to remember that part of yourself. And I think about that often. Like, I think you can really tell the difference between, like, it's so unusual to watch or read books where somebody captures a teenage voice that you really notice it, even though there's so much fiction out there, I think, that has, that stars teenagers. But like, even I was watching Juno recently, and I was like, oh, there's that sound of dialogue of people who are highly intelligent, but whose brains aren't, fully formed yet. And it's like, it's a different type of dialogue. Like teenage dialogue sounds different when you hear it, and like it rings authentically. And I think you're really good at that too.
Oh, thank you.
Really, really very much admire that. But I was thinking, also I was wondering, like, do you think about, because you worked as a social worker for many years?
Yeah.
Do you write sort of from, do you think you write about teenagers like more from your own personal experience and memories, or some from like things that you sort of observed professionally?
I think a little of both. Like a lot of both The Last Confession of Autumn Casterly and Shipped have a lot of pranks in them, and that's something that my friends always did in high school. And actually in Shipped, this scene, it's not really a spoiler, so I'll just say it, when Wesley pranks Stella by putting a bunch of kind of sex ed library books into her bag so that she walks out and sets off the alarm, and the librarian sees the books in there. Yeah, a bunch of my friends did that to me in high school, and it was very embarrassing. Yeah. But I was like, I need to include this in the book because it was great.
Right. Well, I think it's very interesting, like the way I think we're able to remember very easily, like, the sort of agony of being a teenager, but sometimes it's harder to remember just the funny stuff. Like, we thought we were a riot, and we and so it's like nice to capture that.
Yeah, there's like a scene in The Last Confession of Autumn Casterly where like they go and bug one of their friends who's working at CVS, and they ring up some condoms and then make him have to like call over the intercom to return them because they don't want to buy them after all. And like my friends, we totally did that, like all of that stuff. We were always doing that to each other. So it's kind of, I pull a lot from my own kind of experience and obviously from my time in social work too, a little bit.
Never hard to have a good memory, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah. I just kind of try to, what I'm always going for is just kind of to show, I guess the experience of like, that when you're a teen, sometimes things are messy and sometimes things are nonlinear and sometimes there's a lot of like indecisiveness and sometimes there's no, like I purposely don't try to give my characters like super shiny, perfect, happy endings because I feel like that's not what wasn't really like my experience, and I feel like that's not a lot of other people's experience too.
Right. There's something almost more satisfying about it being a little bit less satisfying. But so thinking about your down-to-earth characters, thinking about then putting that together with fan culture, I was sort of, I don't know, I was thinking about how it's an interesting almost like contrast to have these sort of very grounded grounded characters who have like very real problems, and then they're like finding their escapes in fan culture, and just kind of that comparison of like the sort of stereotype of fans as kind of using whatever world that they're interested in, like as a form of escape, which is often a negative stereotype. And so you have this like almost like popular image of fans being unconnected with reality, disconnected with reality. And then you have these two main characters who have a lot going on in their, in their home lives. So I guess I was just curious what, like, if you had thoughts on kind of that, like, reputation that fan culture has for being escapist. Is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing? Is it true? I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, so I think fan culture is great. I mean, I think that, and I tried to kind of show it in the books. I kind of railed on people who say bad things about fan culture. Like there's one scene when Stella's talking about her cosplay and her mom's like, there's a lot of real issues in this world. Like you should focus on real issues. And Stella's like, but what's wrong with this? I enjoy it. Like, who says I can't be interested in fandom? Well, I also study in school, and I also have my friends, and I work at the ice cream parlor. Like, why can't I have this too? And then her friend says, nobody ever asks, people who buy season tickets at like sports games, for example, like why don't they care about real issues? It's just fandom. And it's I kind of wanted to show that in the book too, that for me, fandom is very important and very real. And I think that that it's okay to treat it like an escape sometimes, like sometimes people need an escape, and that's totally fine.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah. I think it's interesting. I feel like I've seen different approaches to this, like in different, so like some authors will be like, no, it's not an escape. You're actually engaging with the real world every time you read a book. And other authors are like, it's good to escape. And, I think like both are right in some ways, but it's interesting the way I think people often feel very strongly about this idea of escaping. Like like it's an interesting.
Yeah. Like, I guess I don't think there's anything wrong with it being an escape, but I also think that it's perfectly fine to like engage in it as an escape or also in the real world at the same time. Kind of another example that I was thinking about, not really fandom, but Pokemon Go. I'm a huge Pokemon Go player. And I remember when that came out, people were making all kinds of nasty comments like, oh, people are going outside just to stare at their phones and play Pokemon. And I'm just like, there's people outside with groups of people walking around, and we're still going to shame them for it. Like, people who are interested in nerd culture, like there's nothing you can do. You can be outside with people walking around and people will still make comments about it. So ignore them. Like, who cares, Yeah.
And I think there's a bit of it's an interesting shift where I think people look at a younger child who's reading and often are like, oh, they're immersed in their book. That's good. That's a good sign. That means they'll like go far. And usually they mean it in sort of practical way, like it shows promise. But then I think like past a certain point of age, they're like, that person needs to stop reading books so much. Like there is this interesting like switch when it becomes like, I don't know, like not celebrated. So I don't know. I think about that a lot.
Yeah, it's a good point.
Yeah, I don't know. So I want to talk about like I don't know, you've written a lot of different types of books. I was just kind of curious to hear your thoughts on like moving between genres, because you've written dystopian books. Your last book was a psychological thriller, very different tonally from Shipped, which is like this cute nerdy rom-com. So like what is different and what's the same writing these types of?
Yeah. So I always laugh because I have 5 published books and they're all completely different genres. I don't know what's wrong with me, but I just love different genres. I think some differences, and one thing that I've been saying is between The Last Confession of Autumn Casterly and Shipped is that Autumn is it's a very dark book, but it's also a thriller. So the whole time when I was writing it, I was planning it out, I had to look at, okay, what am I revealing here? What am I revealing here? I have to like meticulously plan it. Whereas with Shipped, I was focusing more on like the characters and their relationship, their development. So I kind of let the characters tell me where they wanted to go. I didn't sit down and plot everything out the way I did with my previous book. So I guess that was something that was kind of different for me. Like I remember as I was writing, it kind of popped into my head. I'm like, wouldn't it be funny if Stella was working at the ice cream parlor and Wesley came to troll her and they start bantering back and forth? And so I'm like, you know what? I want to write that scene. That scene would make me happy. So then I sat down and I wrote that scene and it ended up in the book. So
nice. Yeah. So
There's
do
a
you,
lot
do you
more-
not, is it a different like format for outline? Like, do you not outline as much for a rom-com as you do for a,
So usually I do outline for Shipped. I did, so I outlined Warship 7. I outlined all of the episodes of it. But then for as far as Stella and Wesley, I had a few points that I was like, I know this needs to happen. Like I knew that they, at the SciCon scene, something that's a spoiler was going to happen. I knew at prom, something else that's a spoiler was going to happen. I knew I wanted to have a laser tag scene because it was mirroring one of the big scenes in the show. Their relationship mirrors the relationship between the two main characters in the show. And so there's a scene when the main characters are dueling. So I'm like, Stella and Wesley are going to duel a laser tag. So stuff like that I kind of planned out, but really it was just maybe like 5 bullet points. And then as I was writing, I would cross them off. But whereas for let's say Autumn or my other books, Freedom Trials, Red Labyrinth, I would, I had like, oh gosh, 50 bullet points of stuff that needed to happen in order. Whereas with Shipped, I kind of gave myself a little bit more freedom to kind of let the characters direct me where they wanted to go. So it was really fun. It was actually a challenge for me because I had never done a book that was more kind of character focused before. Most of my books are plot focused. So that was kind of a craft challenge for me. So
are there things you feel like you've gotten better at over the 5 books, or things that are just still always hard?
Oh gosh, I am so bad at writing like chemistry between characters, which is why for a romance, for me, it was like particularly challenging because I always feel like my romance scenes are like super awkward. But so I think that's something that I'm still working on is like how to make characters have like an authentic kind of romance, which I don't know. I really like the way it came out in Shipped, but it was a challenge for me. I had to rewrite it several times to get to a point where I was comfortable with it. But
I relate to that so strongly. Like at one point, I don't know if it was our editor or if it was my agent, but I was like given a homework assignment. No, it was my agent because there was actually an issue here. My agent was like, look, like you have to put in more chemistry. This was like a mandate from on high from our editor who likes chemistry. And she was specifically the word she kept on saying was like, she was like, your book needs more frisons. And I was like, and so my agent was like, why don't you read Cassandra Clare? She has a lot of frisons in her books. And so I read them, and like what a lot of the time what Cassandra Clare does is like their eyeballs like do things at each other, like they stare daggers at each other, or they just do things with their eyeballs. And then the next time around, I sent the draft to Ari, our editor, and she was like, so now you have these floating eyeballs in space that are just kind of shooting lasers at each other, and you need to do other things. Yeah, it was it was hard. I feel your pain.
Yeah, I mean it's good though. I feel like I like that advice though, kind of to read Cassandra Clare. I know for me when I'm working on romance, I'll go and read a romance novel because that always helps me to kind of get in the mindset of writing the chemistry of the characters and everything. Even if I'm not writing a romance book, if I'm writing like a romance arc in a book,
right.
That helps me to read a romance novel.
Yeah, it's a little bit of homework can pay off.
Just like with world building, if I'm working on my world building, I will go and pick up a great epic fantasy like Fireborn, and I will read it.
That's very sweet. I feel like for world building for me, I was reading a lot of Cinda Williams-Chima's book.
Yes.
Our editor also did. Yeah. It's interesting how it kind of opens things up for you, but it can be kind of scary too because like I feel like if you're reading something that's like you're like, oh, this is really good. I don't know.
Oh yeah.
I just didn't even try.
Why to write this when like Libor is out here writing world building? Like,
can you? Is there any genre that you have not written yet that you'd like to write in the future, or age group, or like?
Yeah, well, I'd love to write some adult. Be interesting to me, and I would love to write a horror, which is interesting because I'm like a huge baby. Like I will not watch horror movies. I will not touch them with a 10-foot pole. Like they scare me. But I would love to write one. You know, I'd love to write a really atmospheric, creepy book. Like I loved even for for fantasy, I loved like Aaron Craig's House of Salt and Sorrows. Like so atmospheric and creepy and dark. I'd love to write something like that.
Yeah.
I think, I'm really open to
you don't want to read it, but you want to write it. I feel like you would have a good radar for what you would find creepy, you know, and then.
Yeah, exactly. And like if I'm writing it, then I know what's gonna happen. Like House of Salt and Sorrows, I got to the creepy scene. I was like by myself in like middle of the night, and I was like, Erin, how could you do this to me? Everyone has to go read it. It's really good.
Right. Can you talk a little bit? Oh, you know what? No, sorry. I'm trying to figure out which questions I want to do because I'm running out of time. Okay, so we have your 2 books here. I was just curious. This is like actually a question that was inspired by another person on your editorial team. Who would be friends with who from these 2 books?
Ooh, so I think that Ivy, and I've thought about this a lot, I think Ivy from The Last Confession of Autumn Casterly is a Warship 7 fan, and I bet that she reads Stella's fanfic.
Oh, I love that. Yes.
I think that Stella would look at Autumn and was like, who is this troublemaker? Like, get out of here. And because like in my head, they're in the same school. So
is it the same town? Like, is the town named? I forget.
So Autumn specifically takes place in Concord, New Hampshire, which is my hometown, and it has a lot of references to Concord in there.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas Shipped takes place in generic New Hampshire town.
So it could be Concord.
Yeah, in my head, I was picturing Concord. The school in the book is named after my old high school principal in Concord. So yeah. I think mentally it was Concord. I was like, I don't know if I can get away with explicitly writing another Concord, New Hampshire book. So I will just write a vague New Hampshire book.
Call it a sequel. Now I'm just trying to figure out like the legal like situation. Like if you wrote fan fiction of your own books that was crossover, putting characters, like could you do that? Like could you put it on AO3? Like that would be cool.
Maybe if I had a fake name.
Yeah, just invent a username. It's fine.
Could write fanfic of my own book.
Yeah, that's a great way to break into the fan fiction world. Can you talk a little about your path to publishing? Because I realize I don't know, and I'm very curious.
Yeah. So I actually, my path to publishing was super weird and nonlinear. So my first 3 books, I ended up pitching myself to publishers and getting book deals, and that's not the traditional way to do it. Traditionally, you get an agent. Yeah. So for The Last Confession of Autumn Casterly, I just sent a traditional query letter, signed with my wonderful agent, and that was in 2018. We did some revisions on the book. At the time, it was called Walk the Shadow, which in my head, it's still called Walk the Shadow, and put it on sub, and it sold pretty quickly, like 2 weeks later, which was really cool. And then it sold in a 2-book deal. So Shipped was the second book in the 2-book deal. So then for Shipped, since it was already under contract, basically I just wrote a bunch of different pitches and proposals and sent them to my editor, and she liked Shipped the best. And so at the time it didn't have a title. I sent it. I'm just like, I'm going to call this, I called it Nerds in Love, and love was crossed out, and I wrote hate. That was the title of the book. But yeah, so Ari actually picked Shipped. My editor picked Shipped, and from there I drafted it on deadline. So it was all summer of 2019. I was living in Switzerland, and I wrote it almost entirely on the public transportation boat that goes around Lake Zurich, because there is no Wi-Fi on that boat. So it was nice and free of distractions.
Oh, that sounds really nice.
Yeah, so that's my publishing journey, I guess. Kind of a weird one, but
that's fun. That's like so impressive that you got published without an agent. That's like basically, I mean, it's really, you got published in a traditional way without an agent, which is like almost not done anymore.
Yeah, it's kind of I connected with my first publishers through there's a contest on Twitter called Pitmad, where you put basically a short pitch of your book into a tweet and you put it on, and then my editors requested the pitches from Twitter. So that's how I connected with them. So
that's crazy. I didn't realize Pitmad was also like for the editors also would request things from it.
Yeah, I love Pitmad. I'm a big supporter of Pitmad.
Yeah. And so that's a really cool event. Are you working on anything now that you're excited about?
Yeah, I'm kind of dabbling between a few different things at the moment. I'm working on a speculative mystery that has like some creepy birds in it. And then I'm working on another speculative contemporary. I don't know how I kind of ended up with multiple genres at once. And then I'm kind of dabbling at this adult sci-fi, and I'm just all over the place.
Yeah. How has it been writing, like in the, I don't know, like now, the last year versus on the boat in Zurich? I'm just curious.
Yeah.
How's that going?
So for me, I'm someone who writes best out of the house. I get so distracted inside. And so when I'm in the house, I find it really hard to concentrate. So this past year has been really hard for me to kind of force myself to focus inside. I love writing in coffee shops, love writing on the boat, which unfortunately isn't around for me anymore because I'm in the US, but great boat. So now that kind of things are reopening, and I'm vaccinated now, so I've been able to go back to some of my coffee shops, which has been really nice. But it's definitely an adjustment for sure.
Yeah, I'm sure. I feel the same way. I wrote. Oh, I should remind everyone. We're wrapping up soon. We're going to switch over to audience Q&A. So please do add questions in the comments. We'd love to hear from you. But yeah, I think. I wrote a lot in the past when we were traveling. We used to travel a fair amount because my husband's a grad student. And so he, like in the summers, we would be abroad and he would be studying a language and I would just like have my laptop in various European cities. It was very idyllic. And it's hard to write in just like one place, specifically even one room. It's been really a bit of a challenge.
Yeah, it's been weird. It's been a weird year, I think, all around.
Yeah, absolutely. What are you reading these days? Anything good?
Yeah, so I was going to grab it, but it's too far out of reach. I've been reading The Ones We're Meant to Find by Joan He. It's really good.
I've
it's like a YA
thought about that.
dystopian, but it's really interesting. I really like it. I just read Heartbreakers and Fakers by Cameron Lund. That was also really good. That comes out next month.
Oh, really? Nice. Yeah.
So, yeah, lots of good stuff out there right now. What about you? What are you reading?
Well, I haven't read. I don't know. I've sort of been on a bit of a reading block for a while, so I don't know. Trying to think what I've been reading. Most recently, I read The Goblin Emperor, which was really good.
Oh, is that YA or no?
No, it's adult.
Okay, I haven't heard that one, but it sounds like something that's up my alley. So
it's a lot of fun. It's a weird book because basically I started reading it because it was like many people recommended it to me, and it's an interesting book because it's like nothing happens in it. Like, and I don't usually like books where nothing happens. It's just like this goblin's dad dies, and it turns out he's like the next emperor. He was like very low on the line of succession for the Elvish throne. He's like half goblin. And then like there's a giant like Hindenburg style blimp accident, and then everyone in the royal family dies except him, and he ascends to the throne. And then the novel is just like him like learning how to be the emperor, and it's like, oh, I have to wear these fancy shoes. Oh, I have to pick out my sigil, and that's like the whole book. Like nothing else.
So fun, though. I would read that.
Yeah, it's 500 pages of that, and I just like gobbled it up. And like it's a lot of a very intense like linguistic world building, which I'm also usually not a fan of. Like you open it and it's like, here's a guide. The language of the Elvish lands. I was like, oh boy, like I'm really not that type of reader usually, but I just liked it. So that was a good one there recently. And also Station 11, which I thought of when you mentioned, that was early pandemic, very good book. But I was thinking about that when you mentioned like the way your two books could be in the same town, because she kind of does that with her books, I think, where they're all kind of like, they overlap in weird ways. Like characters reappear in different books, so there's precedent.
Yeah, I like that too. I've always liked that. Actually, I found that in adult romance they do that a lot, where like the different characters cross over to the different books, and like you'll be reading a book that's like later in the series, and all of a sudden the couple from the first book will pop up. I love that.
Mm-hmm.
I always love seeing kind of like Easter eggs from previous books.
Yeah, it feels like you're being rewarded for your attentiveness.
Hi, Shane.
I'm back. Really fantastic conversation, a lot of fun. I have several questions of my own. There are a couple of questions from the audience, so I hope there come in some more questions from the audience. But my first, our last like event pre-pandemic was Cassandra Clare. So anytime someone mentions her, I'm like, I remember. Like,
The good old days, the before times.
yeah. It was Cassandra Clare in conversation with Liva Bray, and it was so fantastic. And everyone was just like sprayed from head to toe in Lysol. Like,
Oh, right, because it was like in March.
yeah, it was like it was like end of March. So like St. Louis was still just like on the cusp of what's going on. And like there was a known case like circulating in high schools. So especially because it was a YA event, we were like, oh God, what do we do?
Right. And it was really pre-mask, like
Oh, big time, yeah.
Right. And you were like, is it surfaces? Like maybe we should wipe all the handles. I don't know.
We did, yeah. Like we were just like wiping everything and just like staring at people like, how do you feel? You feel okay? Like, yeah.
Yeah.
But I have my first question for you, and then we'll go to some audience questions, because you did mention, Meredith, that you are like want to write adult. So I always wonder, and I know that there is always a very special reason, and I have very fond feelings for YA, but I always wonder like why authors choose to write YA when there is like you get like 4 years kind of with like your audience.
Mhm.
So if you get them when they're like starting YA, like I mean, let's be fair, like a lot of adults read YA.
Yeah.
But I always wonder, like, what made you gravitate, and this is for both of you. So what made you gravitate to YA versus like doing adult?
I think for me, I love reading YA. It's what I mostly read. I do read adult sometimes too, and I read middle grade sometimes too. But I think YA is just kind of the characters I've always related to the most. I think it's a lot of themes of like of growing up and kind of finding yourself and finding your identity and kind of just figuring things out. And I always kind of related to that uncertainty of the characters, I think. So I just always really enjoyed it. And I think for me also, I love like fantasy and sci-fi. And I think for me, it's a little hard because a lot of the adult sci-fis and fantasies are like bricks, like these like 700-page long. And I think for me, that's a little intimidating. So I like YA fantasy for me is like a little bit more accessible, I think. So I've just always really enjoyed reading it. It's something that even before I was writing it, I enjoyed reading it. So I think that's for me why I gravitated that way. What about you, Rosaria?
I think it's very similar. Like I think so it's interesting because like at this point I'm working on the third book in the Fireborn trilogy. So like this is the second one. I feel like I should show it. And it just came out. And so I've been working on this trilogy for like since I was like just out of college. So for a long time. And I feel like at that time I was actually very close to the age of the characters. So it was I think YA is kind of like, you know, whereas with younger books for children, like you're never writing as the same identity as the character. But with YA, there is kind of this space where it's a coming of age story, but often like the writers are like close to the age of their characters, maybe when they start the stories. And so that was kind of where I started. But now that like it's been a long time, and at this point I do read like adult. So I feel like I've sort of transitioned in a way that's weird to sort of go from relating to the characters to kind of remembering how I would have related to the characters when I was younger. I think that, like the sort of theoretical reason I always wanted to write YA is like because it is the type of book that I always found like when I was the age where books were really sort of very, very important to being able to sort of be formative to my character, like that it was young adult books. And so I always wanted to write like for that kind of aged reader. And I think it's a type of story that you can't really tell for younger or for older. There's sort of this like loss of innocence like that comes with like transitioning from being an adolescent to an adult that you could sort of like explore with YA. And I've been very surprised by them just sort of looking at, because you're right, it does seem like it should just be sort of 4 years, because often the publisher will even say like ages, like, and they'll give you like a time frame on the back of the book. but I've been very surprised by the range of readers, because I'll have moms who contact me who's like 9-year-olds will read the books, which for me, I'm like, this is too young, don't read it. But they do. And so, but then also, like sometimes like quite elderly, like I've had, like people in their 70s come up to me at book events and say that they like to read YA. And so, it's interesting realizing it's not as much of an age category for the audience as you would expect, I guess, was kind of one of the things I've noticed that I think is really interesting.
Yeah. I love finding like adult YA readers, because a good book is a good book. Like it doesn't, like I read middle grade, even though like I don't even really find myself like getting opportunities to book sell to middle. I'm just like, where's that one kid like hanging out in middle grade that needs a recommendation because I got like 5? Like I have.
Yeah.
But yeah, they always stick me over an adult, and I'm just like, well, okay, but if you want to, we can take a little tour.
I often feel like middle grade and adult have actually more in common than YA. Like it's interesting, the conventions stylistically are actually more consistent, and then YA does have its own stylistic conventions that are, I think, really specific. I've noticed that. I don't know.
Yeah. I love how accepted genre is in YA, because like I love genre fiction. Like, I mean, I also love like literary and like, I mean, I really just love books. But like genre fiction in YA is so accepted. It's just like, oh, like, are you are you coming looking for mystery? Are you looking for romance? Are you looking for fantasy, sci-fi? Like, no one, I mean, people do come looking for like more highbrow, like literary YA, but it's like not as common, and it's more fun to like experiment and play and read like across different genres. And
I think also I really appreciate the emphasis on like plot and pacing. Like I feel like a lot of YA is kind of written with the same eye to storytelling as like screenplays are, and I just really like I love it. I just think that's like such a fun way to think about stories. Like I don't know. Yeah, I think the sort of more meandering books that are more of an adult type of book, which is, it has its place, but I just like really love kind of the science of pacing. I just I love a well-paced book.
Yeah, I like that too. I feel the same way. I love like the fast-paced kind of YA genre fiction.
All right, let's do some audience questions. That was very meandering, my question. So Michelle is asking, what was your favorite prank to write in the book, and were there any deleted pranks?
I'm gonna say the library book was the one I had the most fun with, just because again it was based off of something my friends did in high school. So I was just kind of remembering that fondly, and all the kind of fun times that we had while I was writing it. There weren't any deleted pranks, although my friends did have this one really epic prank that I really want to work into a book someday. And I wanted to put it in here, but it just didn't happen to fit with the other pranks, didn't happen to fit. But, someday.
Are you going to tell us, or do we have to read the next book to find it?
Oh my gosh, it was ridiculous.
Someone might steal it.
If anyone is watching from my high school, they're going to be like, yeah, so... It's really embarrassing.
Okay, we'll just read your next book. It's okay.
Yeah.
I'm excited.
That's actually the entirety of your next pitch to your editor. Is just like, here's this prank. I would need to write a book about it.
Yeah, it involved some like fake poop.
Oh God.
No. I feel like our editor would be into that.
Ari, are you watching?
Hopefully she's logged off at this point.
Ari has left the room.
I don't see. I think we're safe. Yep.
Okay.
All right. So Vincent is asking for both of you, do you both prefer writing on deadline or without, or with no pressure?
No pressure. No pressure.
I'm kind of a little bit of both, actually, because when I don't have a deadline, sometimes I struggle with focusing and like forcing myself to do it and to get stuff finished, whereas a deadline kind of helps to discipline me a little bit. But it's also hard. Like I wrote Shipped on deadline and I was like miserable. I kept feeling like I wasn't doing it fast enough. And so I think it's like somewhere in between.
Yeah, I think I'm just basically like the less, like as little deadline as is like humanly imaginable is the amount of deadline I want. Like,
Yeah.
and it's not like I won't write. Like I write compulsively either way. But like when you add on deadline, it's like it just like it takes like my, I don't know. It like I learned this after getting myself into a 3-book deal. Where I had to write the next 2 books on deadline, and I was like, oh, it turns out I really don't like writing on deadline.
It's hard. I feel like before Shipped, like I feel like I'd seen a lot of authors talking about like, oh, writing on deadline is awful. I'm like, guys, come on, it's not that bad. And then I get a deadline. Suddenly I'm like, this is awful. Like,
yeah, and like all the things that I think make it easier for some folks. I don't know. I just like being paid in advance is like actually a big stressor for me because it's like, well, if it's bad, I can't just like, like it has to be polished either way. Like I can't just put it in my drawer. Like it's like this. Oh, it just makes it very, very stressful.
Yeah, no, I could definitely see that.
Yeah. Like if I were an author, I would worry about like turning something in and being like, yay, like this is done. And then being like, I can't fix this. Like, just give me the money back. Like, I'd be like, no, like, run away.
There's apparently stories of Rowling when she was late on book 4. She was like, you could have the money back. And the publisher was like, no, we don't want the money back. Yeah.
I had a question about, so we actually had this really great event a couple weeks ago, and the author was talking about ComicCon, and I've been to a few as like a bookseller. We've been there selling books for, like, I met William Shatner. Well, no, technically I did not meet William Shatner at all. He stood about like 15 feet behind me, and every time I looked at him, he like looked away. So
you like stared at William Shatner and scared him.
yeah. It was like, oh, no eye contact with William Shatner. So yeah, like I've worked a couple, and like in my head in like high school, but like when I was more judgmental and like not nearly as like open-minded as I am now, I like kind of scoffed at like the idea of people who went to Comic-Con and like now I'm just like, yeah, you are living an amazing life. Like I'm a trained actor. Like why would I not want to like go and cosplay and like do this? But I haven't yet. Like I don't know why. Like I don't really have like a fandom. I'm like
what were you into in high school? Like what were you reading?
What did I read in high school?
What table did you sit at in high school?
Oh, I was definitely the theater kid. Like,
okay.
Yeah.
Me too.
Yeah, like, yeah, I did speech and debate. I did theater. So yeah, I guess I was reading a lot of like Shakespeare and plays and like weird poetry. And, like,
okay. Too cool for cosplay. I get it.
I guess like I only recently like, I mean, really in the past 5 years have become a sci-fi reader. Like, and I'm very open about that. Like, I didn't really read sci-fi in high school or college, or like even in the beginning of my book selling career. But recently I have been really like expanding. And in the past year, I think I've read like 5 or 6, like across the board, like YA, sci-fi, some like a little like some soft fantasy, some pretty hard adult like sci-fi. I even read.
What do you recommend?
Oh, well, I was gonna say for horror, like, so I read my first horror novel, like I think ever, because I'm with you, Meredith. Like I scare so easily. But I read Sam J. Miller's. Crap, what is the name of it? Blade Between. I think it's called Blade Between. But he's a queer sci-fi speculative fiction horror writer, and like I read his sci-fi and it was like, maybe I could do his horror, like maybe, and I could, but it was also terrifying. So I'm still like not quite a horror reader, but
I always say everyone who I've known who has said like, oh, sci-fi is too weird or like Comic-Con's too weird. I'm like, you just haven't found the right one yet. Like everyone could find a sci-fi that could speak to them, whether it's a show or movie or a book. Just haven't found it yet. Just give some more a try. You'll like sci-fi.
Everyone needs that like gateway, like sci-fi. Yeah.
And Comic-Con too, like Comic-Con is so much fun. And like I think that it has this like stigma. It's like, oh, there's a bunch of weirdos walking around in costumes. Whereas like it's just such a fun atmosphere. Like Comic-Con's great. Everyone should go to a Comic-Con sometime.
Just I feel like I look back on everything about it that I didn't like now with nostalgia because I'm like, oh my God, it was so crowded.
Yeah, that is what I did not like about Comic-Con. Like, there are too many people here.
You're about, you're like, did I dream that we were all in?
Also, like at Comic-Con, like my least favorite thing was like how far you had to walk between like things because there are so many people that love this stuff. So like you have to have like a huge space. Like the St. Louis Comic-Con is like the size of a football field plus like several conference rooms, and I was just like,
I love the St. Louis Comic-Con.
Yeah, it's good. It's really good. So
yeah, I feel like the smaller ones sound like they would be much nicer.
I've never been to New York or San Diego Comic-Con. I always say that New York Comic-Con has been thwarting me for years because every year I plan to go and something happens, like a wedding or an event or a global pandemic or something stops me from going to New York Comic-Con. So someday I will go.
Yeah. Well, now you have a perfect opportunity because I think this book would be prime for Comic-Con people.
I think so too.
Yeah. I would be surprised if it gets pushed pretty hard when the circuit reopens.
Yeah. All right. What else? We don't have any more. Oh, Jamie, of course, is like very like heart-faced in love with Ray cosplay.
Yay!
So,
Ray cosplay.
Yeah. And I think if I did cosplay, this is like probably what I would do. But Nightcrawler, like I would go like full like body paint, like costume. Like, I would go all out if I did it. Like that's the type of costuming that I love. Like, I'm either like, acting like I'm wearing like period clothes or whatever, and like really embodying like just like fancy costume or just like normal people like acting as a human, but like I've always wanted to be like, I would love to be in a Marvel movie. Like I would let myself just be like, okay, 5 hours to get in a costume, like let's do it. Like
that's like probably they have trouble finding people who feel that way, so maybe you should contact them.
Yeah. Hi, Marvel. Throw out Alan Cumming. I'm in. Like, well, we are almost out of time. So I want to thank you both, like, really so much. Rosaria, I can't wait until we are able to have you back in St. Louis, hopefully for the third book. So, and let me know like when you ever plan on being in the St. Louis area, because I would love
actually,
to.
I have a school visit, so I will. Okay, sorry.
Oh wow!
We'll have a conversation. A physical like in-person school visit in November. It's crazy.
Oh, you gotta come visit me in St. Louis.
Oh, yeah. Oh my gosh. Will you? Yeah. Oh yeah.
Yeah, come visit both of us.
Perfect. Yeah.
And
the real
Meredith,
IRL meeting is still to come.
Congratulations on your new book, Meredith, and I wish I were holding your new book as well, Rosaria, but I'm holding the first one, so if you haven't started the series, start with the first one. The second one's already out. Third one will be out soon, I guess.
Yeah.
So these books are all on our shelves at Left Bank Books, left-bank.com, and for Meredith's, you can actually get a live signed copy because Meredith came by and signed copies that are not book plates. They are like the real deal signed books. And for the audience watching, thank you so much for coming tonight, and we hope to see you again really soon. Be sure to follow us on Facebook and YouTube. Have a good night.
Good night.